Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to have part 3 in our series on handling difficult conversations and successfully managing through them. Hi, I am Dr. Jackie Cawley. I'm your host today from the Delean Institute for Growth and Wellness, and we are glad to see you with us this morning. Or it could be afternoon for you. Shouldn't assume that. So in our last session, part 2, we described how to prepare and plan and even practice for the multiple different ways that a conversation could happen or play out. And we also talked about how to schedule and commit to having that conversation. In today's series, what we're going to do is to focus on the next 2 phases of the process. And those 2 phases are around actually handling and having that conversation, knowing when to stop. And then what's that follow-up? What do you do after the conversation? And there's a couple of different ways that could go. So what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to share my screen, as I typically do, and we will get into some of the meat of the conversation today. So we are in part 3 of our conversation around difficult discussions or conversations. And what we do here is just pull up our next slide, which is describing phase 3 of this process. How do you hold that conversation with this other important person in your life, whether they're a coworker, an employee, a family member, or friend, compassionately? And you've heard me say that a few different times throughout this series. So when we hold this conversation compassionately, it's important to start with heart. Now, starting with heart comes from Crucial Conversations, an excellent book, and we'll have the sources a little bit later on for you. It's an excellent book that goes through how to hold these conversations, and it's one of my favorites. When they talk about starting with heart, they're focused on really what is the goal for you. And we talked about having that goal and being sure what your goal is, as well as your talking points prepared before coming into the conversation. When I think about start with heart, it's even more than that. It's not just focusing with what is your goal, but it's thinking about being there with the person to have a conversation, which again is between 2 of us, right? It's between 2 people. So there's a back and forth, and you have to really consider the emotions and the thoughts and the beliefs and the perspective of that second person. So when I think about starting with heart, it's really around being compassionate, respectful, and honoring that other person's view and perspective, just as you honor your own view and perspective, because they're going to be different, right? We talked about that in the first part of the series. We all come with our own filters and experiences that color the way that we think and experience the world and perceive others. Start with heart. You want to thank the other person for being here, right? Because these are hard conversations. It's hard for you. It's going to be hard for the other person as well. They're emotional. They're high stakes, as we talked about. So make sure that you thank them for being with you and being willing to have this conversation with you. Keep your voice calm and steady. Try to not let your emotions lead. Let your mind lead instead, and focus on the facts. It's not about a personal attack. What you want to do is describe a situation and the behaviors that you saw that weren't working for you for whatever reason, at work, at home, and then describe the impact of those behaviors, and then describe what you need to see instead and what you're trying to get to as far as a goal. So focus on the facts, not the person. When it feels personal, it feels like an attack. And what that does is send the other person on the defensive. They get angry, you respond back, and it gets into this negative downward spiral. You don't want that. You want an upward spiral, right? You want a positive outcome, even when it's hard, to the conversation. Practice active listening. So when we talk about active listening, it's not just being present. It's good eye contact, right? It's open body language. The body language is really important, so you need to pay attention to that. When you're actively listening to someone, you are not thinking of your response in that moment. You are not coming up with the 6 things that you want to attack them back with. What you're doing is listening to what they had to say, watching their body language, trying to be, using your emotional intelligence to really kind of figure out what the dynamics are and kind of understand where that person is coming from, and even repeat back what you hear. By repeating back what you hear, it validates for the other person that you heard them. People want to be heard, just like you want to be heard. So respect that in the other person too. And then pay attention to your body language. I'm going to just stop the presentation for a second because I want to go over this whole piece around body language with you. Now, when you think about open body language, we're not sitting like this, right, with our arms crossed over, or like this, or like this. No, that's not how we come to a conversation. That's hard. Not if we want to be effective. We want to stay open body, good eye contact, nodding your head, leaning in. When you lean in and you keep your body open, it doesn't feel like you're attacking them. You're staying calm. You're staying steady. You're showing by repeating back that you heard them. And you may not agree with what they're saying, but you heard them. And that makes the other person take a breath and relax a little bit. So don't cross your legs, don't cross your arms, don't go like this, pointing fingers at somebody. Again, that doesn't feel good, right? It can start to feel unsafe sometimes. So making sure that you keep your body language open is really important. Make sure to really watch that because it can get in the way sometimes. And people they're not always paying attention to their body language, right? They're so enwrapped into what they're trying to get out of the conversation that they can get tense instead of just like, when I say like lean forward, I don't mean like lean forward on the desk like this. No, that is not good. You don't want to do that. What I mean by just leaning forward, nodding your head, looking at them intently like I'm looking at you, right? We're not doing this kind of stuff or like that or, none of that. No, that is not helpful in these conversations. Sometimes if they're getting a little heated, actually pulling yourself back a little bit, keeping yourself opening up your arms can make a difference. And just kind of take that breath and settle and just, kind of nod in. Those are some tips that you can use just to help that conversation go a little bit more smoothly. Now, as we move into the conversation itself, again, a number of things that you just want to pay attention to. So I'm going to bring my screen back up for us. For that compassionate conversation, really think about the other person's perspective. Put yourself in their shoes. It's hard for you. It's hard for them. Look for opportunities to get to shared understanding. So every time that you're asking open-ended questions and you're responding back what you heard, you're showing that you are part of the conversation. You're not scolding someone. You're really saying, like, let's get to a goal together. What can we understand together about what the issue is that you're having the conversation about? So if we go back to that employee who may be coming into work late and interrupting others, the shared understanding may be exactly that, right? That her late arrival or their late arrival is impacting the team and they're interrupting others is reducing productivity. And if you can get the person to understand their behavior and how it impacts other, that leads you to that shared understanding. Because once you get to shared understanding, then you have a partner who can help you to problem solve. And let's face it, it's always easier to solve problems if you've got more than one person kind of adding into brainstorming how to solve problems with different possibilities or different possible ways, right? So you want a partner because together you're trying to get to your goal. So look for ways to get to that shared understanding. The shared understanding might be how that individual's behavior in a meeting was disrupting the meeting. And what you really need for them is to just sometimes take a breath and step back a little bit and let others speak. And When you have that shared understanding, you can partner with that individual then about how do you solve that problem? Like, what else could they do? Maybe they weren't aware of their behavior and how it impacted others. So you can get them into a class on emotional intelligence. You can help them build self-awareness. You can give them a few tips like, hey, if you need a timeout, just, take a breath and walk out of the room, come back in and be ready for the conversation, or sit back in your chair, put your hands underneath your bottom and count to 10 before you say anything again. Different ways to problem solve. So again, we talked about voicing back what you hear in order to validate their perspective and make sure that you're demonstrating that you've been actively listening to them. So here's another really important point. You need to know when to take a break. There are 4 Ds that can derail your conversation. Denial. So remember when we talked about the different scenarios or possibilities that could play out during the conversation, they may deny any of it. They may deflect. Oh, it wasn't me, it was Jane. It wasn't me interrupting at the water cooler, at the coffee machine, or over in that cubicle. It was that person wanted to talk to me. It wasn't me. Disruption. Getting angry, pushing back their chair, standing up, just getting angry in general and disrupting the conversation, or dumping. This is another one that you'll see sometimes where the person will start dumping. So if you're a manager and you're talking to the employee, that employee might start to want to help you go with them and dump, if you will, on your upper boss or another person. So these are the 4 Ds that can derail a conversation. Be able to look out for them and know when to take a break. Because the other part about taking a break is that sometimes safety can begin to be an issue. If the emotions are really escalating and you're getting into that downward spiral, it can be very important to actually stop the conversation, take a timeout, and then be able to say, let's take a breather. We can come back to this in a few minutes when you're a little bit more settled. Let's plan to have another meeting at a different time. If it starts to feel unsafe in any way, shape, or form, make sure that you have a strategy to get away from that space, to move away, to take a break. Because if the emotions are escalating and you're having a hard time de-escalating by staying calm and steady, asking those open-ended questions, reflecting back with them what you heard, trying to get to that shared understanding and some type of a mutual agreement to reach your goal. If you're finding that that's escalating and can't get de-escalated, stop the conversation. Take a break. Let them go. Invite them out. Say you'll follow up. Or if they're emotional, say, you take a moment here. I'm going to step out. I'll be back in a few minutes. And again, by having it in a semi-private place where you might be in a corner or in a conference room in a hallway that has, big windows, you're going to be in a safe place and be able to make an exit if you need to, but know when to stop. If it's getting very uncomfortable, you need to know when to stop, right? Okay. So you've had the conversation. You may or may not have gotten to your goal. If you got to your goal, terrific. That's awesome. You still need to follow up. If you didn't quite get to your goal, but you made progress, that's awesome too. The reason is because, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes these are a series of conversations. It may not just be a one and done. So you got to understand that too. Sometimes it takes multiple conversations for you to get to where you need to go. And that's okay. It's all just part of the process. And you'll know that as you go through. So our 4th phase is assess and adjust. When you reflect back, you have to think about what went well or what could have been better. Is there anything that you could have done to even make it safer, more respectful, a better outcome? And did you achieve your goal? Was your goal met? Yes or no? Asking yourself what surprised you, because again, with the multiple different scenarios that can play out that you prepared for, there may have been one that surprised you for some reason and something you didn't see coming because you didn't know what was going on with that other individual's life. And by understanding that, you can see how they're behaving in a certain way, and they can see how their behaviors are impacting you, the family, the team, etc. Ask yourself about emotions. Did they lead you, or were you leading the conversation? What could have gotten adjusted a little bit to make you even better at being able to manage those? And then here's some really important things. Your next steps in timing, your follow-up, and you need to make sure that you're asking for feedback and agreement. right? Because these are hard. So you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing by following up. So when you follow up with somebody, it's good to do it in writing. Particularly if this is in the workplace, you want to always make sure it's in writing. So sending an email back to the person and just saying, thank you so much for having the conversation with me. I really appreciate your time and the effort that you put into the conversation. So thanking them is important. It makes them, again, feel that you care about them as an individual and a human being, and you respect them. The next thing you want to do is to be clear that you outline what you took away from the conversation, what you heard, and what you thought the outcome was, and what you heard the next steps were going to be. So you want to make sure that you feed that back to the individual so that they can respond to it. Because, again, we all come with filters, and you may have missed something, or they may have misunderstood something. So by putting it in an email and sending it back to your employer, your coworker, your boss, etc., then you're making sure that everybody can look at that, respond to it, and get to a shared place of understanding at the end of this. That's important, right? And the next thing that you want to do is to see what's the follow-up on this. Do you need to have another conversation to follow up on change of behavior? Do you need to have a follow-up just to kind of check in on things, to see how things are going, to look at how the problem solving went, and if it made an impact, etc. When do you want to have that conversation? Make sure to get it in the books. It's always better to make sure that you're following up with somebody, because again, it shows that you respect them and you're not putting things off and allowing things like in your head, like, I think everything went well. Yeah, that was great. The other person may have not felt that way and may have a different understanding of the conversation. So you want to make sure that you're getting that clarification and making sure that it's in writing. If you're at home, it can be a text. It can be a follow-up conversation. Hey, I really appreciate your time with me. I know that moving out is kind of a scary thing. We'll get through it together. Again, if you're talking to your 30-year-old who needs to move on. So whatever that conversation is, at work, make sure you're following up in email or in writing of some way. At home, make sure that you're also following up. Set up another time for a follow-up conversation. Each time that you have these, your confidence grows, your relationship improves, and the outcome gets better. You get closer to your goal. So I hope that this was helpful for you and that this series gives you a number of tips and tricks in order to manage some of those really high stakes, difficult, and emotional conversations that we all have to have at different points along the way. We would love for you to join us at the Delean Institute for Growth and Wellness and become part of our community. Check out our website, and we'll see you next month with the next series in our leadership